Okay, now I'm ready for. It's been a week, so now I'm ready to continue my list of my favorite comics. Now, we're going to the later half, and it's probably not going to be as well edited. It's probably not going to have that much edited, just like the last one, which was really just ripping from YouTube sources and stuff like that. I'm probably just going to use pictures to save up on storage. Anyway, the next pick on my favorite comic list is probably V for Vendetta. Now, I like Alan Moore a lot, but I do think that Alan Moore is a slightly overrated writer because, as good as he is, he doesn't really create new ideas or explore themes that haven't already been explored in comics and other stories from before that era. Because, like, Watchmen, pretty famously, Watchmen kind of, like, rips off the ending of an Outer Limits episode. And V for Vendetta is pretty good. Is a pretty good pastiche of dystopian books like 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, stuff like that. I think that V for Vendetta offers a unique just a style all its own, because Watchmen was just the Charlton characters reimagined as gritty, as gritty and realistic, and then the Extraordinary Gentleman is literally just old literary characters coming together in like a superhero team. But V for Vendetta, I only read it one time, but that first time I read it, it left a very big impact on me. And I think it has an advantage over Watchmen because it's not as long as Watchmen, so it's not as daunting of a task to read as Watchmen is. It's also not nearly as wordy as Watchmen, because Watchmen has those supplementary materials that increases the length of reading, which I do like the world building that Watchmen has, but I kind of prefer a more, a more streamlined version of Watchmen, which is what V for Vendetta kind of is. It's kind of more streamlined than Watchmen, where Watchmen's like a grand epic. And this is still epic, but it feels a lot. It's still a grand political narrative, but the characters feel more down to earth than the characters of Watchmen. And I feel like the characters have a lot of emotional depth to them too. Like the dictators, you get to see their flaws, you get to see their weird sexual hang-ups and stuff like that. And V is such an interesting character that, you kind of, like, you kind of, like, understand his point in a way, Anyway, I'll probably move on to the next pick. Next on my list is Scott Pilgrim, the Scott Pilgrim series, but especially Scott Pilgrim Volume 4. Now, Scott Pilgrim is one of my favorite franchises. Like, I love the movie and the comics pretty equally, but I think what I like about the comics is not just that it has video game elements, but that the characters, it feels like a very real relationship you'd have between two people. Because, the characters do a lot more than just state their feelings and their problems. They actively work to improve themselves in their relationship and see how they can be better people. And in a lot of ways, Scott Pilgrim can teach you a lot of life lessons and like how to be a good partner, how to be a good man and stuff like that. And it's like it's basically about someone taking a guy taking his responsibility. Now, I've heard multiple things about Scott Pilgrim as a character, and like, yeah, like he's somehow a nerd who knows how to fight. So it does kind of feel like wish fulfillment of the author, who is a nerdy comic book writer. But he based a lot of it on his own experiences, which is why it feels so real. Because Scott is more than just a nerd. He's like, or a hipster. I've heard even started. Some people call him a jock, but he's more of like, just like a dumb character. He's more of like a hothead, like golden retriever type kind of, yeah. And like the premise is so absurd that like you get a good laugh, because it's like, Scott's got to beat up 6 dudes and 1 lady. I just kind of spoiled it, but I think most people have already read Scott Pilgrim. He basically has to fight 7 other dudes to get with Ramona, and it's never explained why. It's just that, Gideon started a league. The main big bad started a league of Ramona's exes to just, fuck with her and try to ruin her life. And, ruin the life of anyone she has to date. And it's really good, with a lot of great comedy bits and stuff. And I think it's a big influence on the way I like to draw and stuff, too. Because I read it when I was, in my formative years, right before I went off to college, And it feels like, I feel like I would relate to it more now, since I am Scott's age that he was in the movie. And yeah, Scott Pilgrim is the perfect college age book, I would say. To read right before you're going into college, to understand the complexity of human relationships and stuff like that. It's not the most compelling romance, but it's a fun action comedy, which you surprisingly get a lot out of, and you can actually analyze, because there's people who literally analyze the book very well. And of course, I'm not writing anything down, so my thoughts are a little unorganized, but I would recommend you guys read Scott Pilgrim. It's a pretty great book. And next up is the original run of The Amazing Spider-Man by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Now, if you know anything about me, I'm a big fan of Steve Ditko. I find him a very interesting figure in comic book history, because he doesn't really, there's not much information about him other than what he himself has decided to reveal. He's kind of a hermit in that way. He's a lot like Bill Watterson, where he kind of likes to remain anonymous for most of the time. And since he's dead now, we have no way of really knowing more about him. All we have is what he left for us to know, and it's that intrigue that really draws me to him. Now, I do find his ideology, objectivism, to be admirable in some ways, but in other ways it can kind of boil down to just selfishness, or moralized selfishness in a weird way. But that's for when I actually eventually finish my Steve Ditko video. I have a lot of homework to do on that, and I like Spider-Man. Spider-Man, of course, already covered a Spider-Man book in this, but he's my favorite, hero of the whole genre of superheroes. So when I wanted to get into Spider-Man comics, I wanted to start all the way from the beginning. So I thought, what's better than the Steve Ditko and Stan Lee run? And one thing is that what's really interesting about this run is that you get to see, like, the beginnings of the Spider-Man mythos. Because, like, I remember reading the Avengers comics, and you get to see a little bit of the early start of the Marvel Universe. And, like, it's fun seeing the testing stage of the Marvel Universe to see, like, what they were trying to see, what would stick. And it's kind of crazy how in those first years, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, they kind of nailed it on the head those first years. Like Spider-Man, Stan and Steve were on like a generational run when it came to creating new villains and stuff like that. Like, almost every villain that those two would create would become iconic mainstays of the Spider-Man mythos. Now, I haven't read all the way through this Steve Ditko run. Not yet. I still have procrastinated a little bit on that. But it's really good. And, like, it feels like there's a ton of character development early on in that run that makes it, like, pretty great. Like, yeah, it's still a 60s comic. It's still got corny dialogue, and it's still, like, probably not the most, sophisticated stories. But something about it is that it added something to the superhero genre, like with the Fantastic Four and stuff, that the Marvel Universe added something to the superhero genre that was rarely seen in the medium for a long time. And it was a more realistic take on superheroes, a more grounded, like, humanized take. And this was before Watchmen, where Watchmen is just blind, nihilism. This is a more optimistic take on a realistic, grounded superhero. Because, yeah, Spider-Man has his problems, He's got problems with, girls, rent, and money. But he never gives up. It is unwavering conviction. And a good example of that is the issue If This Be My Destiny, and the follow-up issue where he's crumbled over all this weight, but he pushes himself to fight and lift the burden off of him so that he can, like, literally lift the burden off of him, like, all the weight off his shoulders, so he can save Aunt May. And yeah, I feel like Spider-Man's early years aren't really talked as much as some of his more era-defining runs. Like, yeah, there's YouTubers who have been discussing Spider-Man's run in great detail, like all the different runs. And I feel like Steve Ditko is like a character who's both simultaneously, he's really respected in the industry, but at the same time, due to his own personal convictions, people try to slander him and try to, make it out like was a crazy person, like a hermit, which we have just realized probably wasn't true. He actually had, a friend group and family but he just wanted his life to be private. He didn't want anyone to know what he was. He didn't want people to just know him as the Spider-Man guy. So he decided, to keep his private life and his work separated. Which is why he didn't do very many interviews. And like, I just remember that NerdSync did a video at Steve Ditko called "Why Spider-Man Used to Suck," where he basically, like, makes out, like, Steve Ditko's entire philosophy as like a cartoon caricature of itself. And it's like, and I just thought there's a lot more to Ditko than what that video led on, because like, you can't say that Spider-Man used to suck when that's the foundation of the character. Like, you can't just say the early years suck because Ditko was helping to write, just because you don't like the way Ditko puts his philosophy. Like, yeah, he was like making fun of protesters. Spider-Man was making fun of protesters, but it's like, we don't know what they were protesting. Like, obviously they probably were protesting the Vietnam War, but it's like, it's not like Steve probably was against the Vietnam War, for all we know. He just thought that it was silly, you know. It was silly to see people like attempting to like make a change by just being angry, when it's like the real people who you can get to make change are the people in power. You're not convincing them. Or just throwing up a sign saying, we need to stop this. Like, if you want to make change, like, contact your local office, your local senators, or like people in Washington, and get them to like hear your ideas out. Become a good public speaker, you know. Like, vote for people that don't want to go to war, you know. And I know it's kind of a simplistic view of politics, but still, I think like people think Steve Ditko is just was like a, I don't know, like, I don't think he was drawn to objectivism for the libertarian values. I don't think he was drawn to it for, you know, the values of selfishness and stuff like that. I think what draws Steve Ditko to objectivism was its moral uprightness, you know, the moral virtues that it espoused about how like things are either good or evil, how things cannot change, that you are fundamentally either a good or bad person, and that a hero should not have any, you know, moral coils, which is like explored in his Mr. A comic. He's basically objectivism is basically like, it's basically like trying to rationalize the irrational, which is my problem with it, is that it tries to rationalize something that, like morality, when morality is objectively irrational and is based on subjective, you know, subjective thing. Because like, you could say, oh, it's objective, it comes from God, but it's like, which God are you talking about? Because there's a ton of different religions, and each religion has their own version of their morality that they think is objective. So like, really, this is why I love the show Breaking Bad so much, is that, and which I'll explore later on in another video, but Breaking Bad is basically about how someone's personal morality is very malleable and will change depending on the situation. Because like Walter probably never thought in his life that he would ever become a drug lord, like before he got cancer. Like, he probably would have been strongly against it, because I always envisioned Walter as being a more uptight, kind of like, not really conservative, but more like family-oriented guy, you know? Like, that's why he gave up on his share of the fortune, because he wanted, you know, his share of the company that he started, because he wanted to live a nice life with his family. And he realized that being a chemistry teacher doesn't really provide the means that much for his family, and that he realized, you know, if I could become a drug dealer, I could make a lot more money for my family after I'm gone. He only had, like, what, a year to live? Or, like, 3 years to live? Or something like that. So he decided to go all in. And it shows that his morality was very flexible. Like, even though even Skylar, she obviously, like, reacted like any normal person would. And like, acted crazy. Didn't really act crazy, just act irrational. Because, like, what else? That goes against her entire morality. And as a, mother. And when she, like, realizes, how this could be a benefit to her family, she decides to, like, join in with Walter. But only to the point where she does it, where she can like support the family. She like slowly realized what she did was wrong. And I think a lot of people view Breaking Bad as Walter being the hero when he's not the hero. The show's about his rise and fall, how he like falls, how he like stoops to increasingly low lows to keep himself from like getting found out. It's basically what a man will do for his family, because he's been pushed around by society, and when he finally snaps, he decides to forgo his personal morals for his own benefit, Anyway, back to what I was saying about Spider-Man. Yeah, Spider-Man, like, Steve is a fascinating character, and this early run has so many great moments and, like, really great, like, introductions of characters that I would recommend it to anyone. Anyway, I'm going to go on to the next pick, which is, let me see. It's any comic by Tim Sale and Jeff Loeb, but I'm going to put Superman for All Seasons, even though I love Batman The Long Halloween, which is one of my, if not my favorite, Batman comic. But I feel like, there is some problems with The Long Halloween that most people have pointed out already. But Superman for All Seasons is just a great little comic. It has everything you'd want in a Superman story, really. Like, great characterization of Clark Kent and his supporting cast. Great, great, like, great, like character-driven storytelling, and, it's short and easy to read, too, and it's basically, like, the early years of Superman, where he gets introduced, he gets introduced to all of his, like, supporting cast and villain, Lex Luthor, and, like, it's basically, like, a year in the life of Superman. Like, each chapter is, like, there's 4 issues, and each issue is another season. Like summer, spring, winter, fall, and stuff like that. And you get a really good characterization of Jonathan Kent in this story. And, like, you get to see what hit Superman's family and, like, friends mean to Superman in a way. And the artwork is very, like, retro. It's got that 1950s, 1960s style that, like, like classic Americana look to it. That's really good, which stands out compared to, like, the dark noir stuff of The Long Halloween and Dark Victory. And like Tim Sale is like one of my favorite artists. I might have to make a video on my favorite comic book artist as well. But, you know, the story is just so well written. And like, even though not much happens in the story, it still like feels like you feel like how the emotions, like, you can definitely tell that like Jonathan Kent was written by Jeff Loeb's, was inspired by Jeff Loeb's own experience being a father, and this was written before the tragedy that happened to his son. So the warmth of a father's love feels like very emotional, like very real in the story, and that's probably what draws me to it. Is that it fleshes out characters that were normally just background or supporting characters in the story. And anyway, I think I'll move on to the next pick because I didn't really have much to say about that series, just other than it's good. The next one, well, it was going to be Transmetropolitan, but I've only read one volume of that, so I think I'm going to say that my next pick is either The One by Rick Veitch or I don't know, probably The One by Rick Veitch. Just go with that. The One with Rick Veitch is basically what happens if you took Watchmen and you really played into the metaphor of superheroes like as atomic weapons and used it as like a way to explore like transcendental like thought, and not like transcendental like experiences of the mind and stuff like that. And it's basically the story is a bomb goes off in, like, Russia bombs the United States, but instead of the bomb going off, like, a hero comes to, like, called The One, comes and, like, stops, like, absorbs the blast, causing half the world to fall, like, most of the world to fall asleep. And it is kind of complicated. I'll have to, like after half the world fall, like, most of the world falls asleep, but the few that stay awake, like, see the catastrophe, see that pretty much nothing has been damaged, and they're like, I just read it like a couple weeks ago, but basically when everyone wakes up, like, the one will, like, I don't know. It's basically the Cold War with superheroes. I'll say that. That's how I'll explain it. Like, there's these two American heroes, and then there's this Russian hero that fight each other, and the one is, like, in the middle of the conflict he tries to wake people up. Basically, when the one invites you to, like, see to, like, his domain, he removes your eyes so that you can see like how the world really is, I guess, like, wake you up to, like, you know, to like the world around you, because even though you can see, you trust, like you'll trust your eyes too much, and you like miss out on what you can't see, what you can like, you're basically almost as blind as if you didn't have, and it's like you're basically as blind as someone who can't see, because you only view the world through a narrow lens. And when he like removes your eyes, he expands your consciousness. It's basically about like stuff, I guess you could say like the Christ consciousness, or like you know, the consciousness of like everyone on a subatomic level. The story is basically about how everything is connected in a strange way. And yeah, it's definitely like a little complicated, because like I had a hard time recounting the plot to you. But if I like could write it down, I could probably recount it at much greater detail. But like the artwork's pretty great. It's peak like 1980, like it's peak 1980s too. Like all the character designs, like one of the main characters is like a punk girl who has like a son, and like there's like two composing forces. The one, and I forgot what the other one's name was, but the other one represents like the one represents humanity at its best, like the connectedness of everything. And I forgot what the other character was called, but he takes the form of one of the main characters, and he represents the worst of humanity, like the selfishness, the greed, and there is some corniness to it. Like there's this like old hippie who's constantly like referencing Beatles songs. And like when they all like go to like this, like I guess you could say heaven like state, or like nirvana, they have the Beatles play. Like they have a scene with the Beatles in it, and that can be kind of corny, but still I understand, because it's basically like using the aesthetics of the hippie movement to like make a statement on human nature. And I really liked the series. I would recommend it. Anyway, I guess I'll move on to, something else, which is Doom Patrol by Grant Morrison. Another Grant Morrison pick. I know, surprising, because I told you he was my favorite writer. Well, they were my favorite writer. And the thing about, I think, out of all of Grant Morrison's stuff, I think Doom Patrol is my favorite, because it's like it takes the best of both of his mainstream work, or like his mainstream superhero comic work, where he, goes very deep into the history of the character to like redefine what the character means to a new generation, like his run on Batman or All-Star Superman, but also his more independent work like The Invisibles or We Free, or even Joe the Barbarian, where he gets into like more esoteric like things and the like themes, and like really turns up on the strangeness. Like, this is strange, but it's still like this is a very weird comic, but like it's still even though it's weird, like it's still it still has a conventional story that you can follow along. Like there's still arcs to the story, and it has a very lighter tone, so it's really not to be taken too seriously, except for maybe the final arc. because like he's literally the Brotherhood. Like there's literally characters called the Brotherhood of Dada, which are basically just supposed to be we're basically just embrace randomness for the sake of randomness. So that's not to say that this book is just pure random. There is a lot of depth, and a lot of like psychological and philosophical like themes that you can dissect from this story. And the artwork, which is mostly done by Richard Case, can seem probably like a little stiff to some people, but it does capture the fluidity and like weirdness of the story. Which it's not just weird for the sake of weird. Like, yes, it's postmodern, I would say, in its presentation and style, but very conventional in its storytelling, I would say. And it's pretty good. And like Jamie Hewlett actually did a little bit of some of the artwork in this series in a few issues. So if you're a fan of gorillas, that would be cool for you to check out. You could check this out. But to me, I really fell in love with the characters of the story and how each character represents another part of like the human psyche. Like, you know, Robot Man represents like the mind over matter type of person, where he's like literally a human mind and a robot, but he still sees himself in like a human body and wishes that he could have the human body. And then there is Crazy Jane, who is, got borderline personality disorder and has multiple different personalities. Now, obviously, it's a comic, so it's not that realistic. And each ability gives her like a different power, each personality. But still, it's a very ripping portrayal of the disorder. And you get to explore her psyche, literally go into her mind and uncover her trauma and stuff like that. It's a very, she represents, the chaotic nature of the human mind and how we will change our whole persona sometimes based off things we went through. And then we have Cirrus, or whatever, the character of the bandages is called. He represents the fluidity of gender identity and stuff like that, which is kind of foreshadowing Grant Morrison, how they would present themselves, I guess, in the future, whatever. But it is a comic that's one of those where it's a progressive, but it's not I guess you could say woke in the way that we most would usually use the word woke. But there's still some politically incorrect elements to it. The way this one black character talks. He literally talks in the We Was King dialect. The We Was Kangs dialect that you see in memes. And I don't know, it's just a fun series. A lot of weird elements that, if you like the more strange or unusual side of stories, especially if you want something like that with superhero comics, where it's almost like an art house film made into a superhero comic, then I would check it out. It's pretty good. And next up is Planetary. Now, I know the writer is also been canceled, and I don't condone what he did, but his story, Planetary, was really good. This one, I read it all the way through. I read the omnibus, and I read it at least twice now, and it gets better with every reread, because it's basically like it should be a TV show, I say, but even then, it's probably never going to be a TV show because it's very specific to the comic and pulp fiction genres. But it's basically the series is basically like archaeologists of the abnormal, and they're basically them like trying to like rediscover like the history of genre fiction from the 20th century. So basically the main character, Elijah Snow, is a century baby, someone who was born on January 1st of 1900, and he basically gets to experience the century, like the 20th century, and it's basically a celebration of superhero, not just superhero storytelling, but like science fiction and like all that all the speculative fiction. Now, I can't really. There is some things that that are like spoilery that I can't really reveal. But basically, like you take like this is what happens when you take like all anagrams for analogs for these characters, these famous, superheroes or like pulp heroes or like movie characters, and you basically get to flesh out their story, like basically it's kind of like a deconstruction, but not really. Or instead of a deconstruction, which is like trying to like reimagine or like get to the point of a character. This is more like a reconstruction where it's trying to understand the character as it was originally intended, trying to get to the real essence of the character in a way. And the plot is like, for the first few issues it's very episodic, but then the plot really drives home in the last few issues, I would say. Well, not the last few, but the little midway point is when the plot really starts, and you get heavy, and he ties up all the loose ends of the story quite nicely on a nice little bow. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just rambling on. Anyway, if you like a more historical approach to comic books, you probably will get a really good kick out of the story and its narrative. Anyway, to move on, the next book is Lost at Sea, which is by the guy who wrote Scott Pilgrim. And this is a very special comic to me because I read it literally on my 18th birthday. So it kind of felt like a transitional point for me from teen to adulthood. And the story is very simple. It's very it's basically a girl goes on a road trip with a bunch of strangers. In the process, she tries to find her soul, which she thinks is in a cat. It's a really great introspective story. And it's I don't know why someone the YouTuber Hazel, she said that it was depressing or dreary, but I don't think it's depressing or dreary at all. I think it's a lot more it's more like a, you know, it's sad, but it's in the same way hopeful, because because even though she doesn't find her soul in a cat, she finds something much more important, which is genuine friendship, and in a way finds her soul by finds her soul not in not literally, but like in her newfound friend group. And I don't know, I feel like I felt a lot, really related to the characters in this story, and like the feelings of loneliness and isolation some might feel, and you know, the feeling of as if you're soulless, or like you don't feel emotions like other people. And yeah, it was my favorite comic of all time before I read, you know, the number one pick. And I don't really see many people talk about it online that much, which is a shame, because I actually like it a lot more than Scott Pilgrim. Now, I haven't read Seconds, but I already know that Seconds is probably going to overtake this as my favorite graphic novel, or one of my favorite graphic novels. And I like how the art is, like, you can see, like, where it's similar to Scott Pilgrim, but it's also very different. It's also in black and white, which makes it feel just a tiny bit more indie and a little more artistic. And like, if Scott Pilgrim was like a pop culture look at like your early 20s, and like when you start to get your shit together, then, you know, this is more of an introspective look at your late teenage years, like the transitional stage between adolescence and adult. It's a lot like Fooly Cooley in that way, which is probably why I liked it so much. I both experienced them at around the same time, and I both like needed to like experience them at a point where I could have gotten the most out of it. Anyway, I'm going to then move on to the next pick, which is The Dark Knight Returns, which, what can be said that hasn't already been said about The Dark Knight Returns? It takes a character like Batman and puts it in like into like the context of the 1980s like political climate, like using Superman as an allegory for the Cold War, and like how we have how the U.S. have powers, you know, beyond human imagination and stuff like that. And it's basically the rebirth of a legend, you know, in a way. It's basically taking Batman and stripping him down to his bare essential elements. And when he's laid bare, he triumphs. He triumphs as a new, more like dangerous version of the legend. Like, it's literally said in like one of the opening chapters where he says that the rain on his chest is like a symbol, a baptism. He's reborn, you know? He's turned into, you know, a new character. Now, I know people like to say that Frank Miller's Batman is fascist, and I can kind of see why people would say that. But to me, I feel like he is definitely a lot more like a revolutionary force, because he's not like I wouldn't say he was ever forcing his will on the citizens of Gotham. He was more so like punishing the criminals who, you know, he's punishing the criminals, because like the whole argument that Batman's a fascist kind of falls apart once you realize that his villains aren't just mentally ill, but are literally like murderous psychopaths. So it's like people who say Batman's a fascist are basically just admitting that they want violent psychopaths to be running the streets. And Batman is like, in this story, a lot more to me. I don't know, it's hard for me to like say it in any way, but to me, Batman in the story is more like anarchist or libertarian, where he's trying to, you know, rebel, I guess, in a way, against the government. And like, it's basically taking it's taking Batman to like darker places than he's ever been, really. And like if Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams like redefined Batman, brought him back to his roots, then this is just taking that and putting that on steroids, turning Batman into like a grim and gritty like metaphor for the rise of extremist ideologies, I guess you could say. And I don't know, the artwork, I always love Frank Miller's art, because it's like he's one of the first real artists to really take like Western comic books and like infuse a manga influence to them, and there's a lot of that here, but not as much as like stuff like Ronin. Like the way he draws eyes, for example, is very anime-like, and the way he like draws action scenes is very anime inspired as well. And I would say more, but I probably have to write it down, so I'm just going to move on to the next pick, which is I Kill Giants, which this is like, I've only seen one person talk about this online, and I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm just going to say that if you haven't read it, read it without any like knowledge of like what's going on, because just read it blind, because it's really good. And I also really appreciate the artwork, which is like kind of sketchy in a weird way, which is pretty cool. And it's very anime inspired as well. Like, this story will touch you, not in like emotionally, in like ways that you haven't really, in like ways you haven't felt in a long time. And anyway, that's the list. So I guess you can like and subscribe. You can tell I kind of tired. I was a little tired. I just got up, so like my mind's kind of blanking right now. Anyway, I don't know what my next video is, but see ya.